Chapter 6. Hours passed. My anger before had been as hot as magma. Now I just felt cold, numb. Echoes of the party drifted in from another area of the building. I felt used, stupid, and most of all, empty. Shouldn't I have been snapping my pencil, throwing tables about in rage, ranting about seeking vengeance upon my foes and their children and grandchildren? Typical Spencer behavior. Instead, I sat there and stared, until the sounds of the party grew quieter. Eventually an aide peeked into the room. You're supposed to leave? I didn't move. Are you sure you don't want to leave? They'd have to drag me out of here. I imagined it, very heroic and defiant. But the aide didn't seem so inclined. She switched off the lights and left me there, lit only by the red-orange glow of the emergency lights. Finally, I stood up and walked to the desk by the wall, where Ironsides had, perhaps accidentally, left the test the children of the first citizens had given her. I looked through the stack. Each of them had only the name filled out, the other questions blank. I took the one off the top, the first one handed in. It held the name of Jorgen Waite, followed by a question. Name the 4 major battles that secured the United Defiant Cavern's independence as the first major state on detritus. That was a tricky question, as people were probably going to forget the Unicorn skirmish. It didn't get talked about as much, but it was where the fledgling DDF had first employed fighters of the second-generation designs, built in secret in Igneous. I trailed over to my desk and sat down, then answered the question. I moved on to the next, then the next. They were good questions. More than simple lists of dates or parts. Some math questions about combat speeds, but most were questions about intent, opinion, and personal preference. I struggled on 2 of them, trying to decide if I should say what I thought the test wanted, or what I thought was actually the correct answer. I went with the second both times. Who cares anyways, right? By the time I was finishing up, I heard people talking outside. Janitors and the sound of their discussion. Suddenly I felt silly. Would I scream and force some poor janitor to pull me out by my hair? I'd been beaten. You couldn't win every fight, and there was no shame in losing when you're outnumbered. I turned over the test and tapped my pencil against it, still sitting mostly in the dark, working by the glow of the emergency lights. I started sketching a W-shaped ship on the back of the test as a crazy idea began to form in my head. The DDF hadn't begun as an official military. It had started out as a bunch of dreamers with their own crazy idea. Get the apparatus working. Create ships from some schematics that had survived our crash on the planet. They'd built their own ships. The door opened, letting in light from the hallway. I heard a bucket get set on the ground outside, and 2 people complaining about spills in the party room. I'll be out in a minute, I said, finishing my sketch, thinking, wondering, dreaming. Why are you still here, kid? A janitor asked. You didn't want to go to the party? I didn't feel much like celebrating. He grunted. Didn't do well in the test? Turns out, doesn't matter, I said. I glanced at him, but he was backlit, just a silhouette in the doorway. Do you ever, I said, do you ever feel they've forced you to be what you are? No. I might have forced myself into it, though. I sighed. Mother was probably worried sick about me. I stood up and wandered over to the wall where the aide had put my pack. Why do you want it so much? The janitor asked. Was there something familiar about his voice? It's dangerous being a pilot. A lot of them get killed. Just under 50% are shot down in their first 5 years, I said. But they don't all die. Some eject. Others get shot down but survive the crash. Yes, I know. I froze, then frowned and looked back at the figure. I couldn't make out his face, but something flashed in his breast. Metals. A pilot's pin? I squinted and made out the shape of a DDF jacket and dress slacks. This was no janitor. I could still hear those 2 out in the hallway, joking with each other. I stood up straighter. The man walked slowly to my desk, and the emergency lights revealed he was older, maybe in his 50s, with a stark white mustache. He walked with a prominent limp. He picked up the test I'd filled out, then flipped through it. So why, he finally asked, why care so much? They never ask the most important questions on these tests. Why do you want to be a pilot? To prove myself, and to redeem my father's name. It was my immediate response, though something else warred with it, something my father had sometimes said, something buried inside me, often overshadowed by ideas of vengeance and redemption. Because you get to see the sky, I whispered. The man grunted. We name ourselves Defiance, he said. It's the central idea of our people, the fact that we refuse to back down. And yet, Ironsides always acts so surprised when someone defies her. He shook his head, then set the test down again. He put something on top of it. He turned to limp away. Wait, I said. Who are you? He stopped at the doorway, and the light outside showed his face more clearly, with that mustache and eyes seemed old. I knew your father. Wait, I did know that voice. Mongrel? I said. That is you! You are his wingmate! In another life, he said. 0700 sharp on the day after tomorrow. Building F, room C14. Show the pin and get access. The pin? I walked back to the desk and found, sitting on top of my test, a cadet's pin. I snatched it up. But Ironsides said she'd never let me into a cockpit. I'll deal with Ironsides. It's my class. I get final say over my students, and even she can't overrule me. She's too important for that. Too important? To give orders? Military protocol. When you get important enough to order an armada into battle, you're too important to interfere with how our quartermaster runs his shop. You'll see. There's a lot you know, judging by that test. But still some things you don't. You got number 17 wrong. 17? I flipped the test quickly. The overwhelming odds question? The right answer was to fall back and await reinforcement. No, it wasn't. He stiffened, and I quickly bit my tongue. Should I be arguing with the person who just given me a cadet's pin? I'll let you in the sky, he said, but they're not going to be easy on you. I'm not going to be easy on you. Wouldn't be fair. Is anything fair? He smiled. Death is. He treats us all the same. 0700. Don't be late. And here we have an image of 3 different ship designs used by the DDF. We have the Poco, the Largo, and the Scout. We'll learn more about these soon in the text. And now we're moving on to Part 2. Chapter 7. The elevator doors opened, and I looked out upon a city that should not exist. Alta was primarily a military base, so perhaps city was an ambitious term. Yet the elevator structure opened a good 200 meters outside the base proper, lining the roadway between the 2 shops and homes. A real town, populated by the stubborn farmers who worked the strips of greenery beyond. I lingered in the large elevator as it emptied of people. This represented a threshold to a new life, a life I'd always dreamed about. I found myself strangely hesitant as I stood there, pack full of clothing over my shoulder, the phantom feeling of my mother's kiss farewell on my forehead. Oh, isn't it the most beautiful thing you've ever seen? A voice said from behind me. I glanced over my shoulder. The speaker was a girl about my age. She was taller than I was, with tan brown skin and long, curly black hair. I had seen her early in the elevator, and noted her cadet's pin. She spoke with a faint accent I couldn't recognize. I keep thinking it can't be real, she said. Do you think it might be some cruel prank they're playing on us? What tactical advantage would they gain by that? I asked her. The girl took my arm in a much too familiar way. We can do this. Just take a deep breath, reach up, pluck a star. That's what the saint says. I had no idea what to make of this behavior. People normally treated me like a pariah. They didn't take me by the arm. I was so stunned that I didn't resist as she told me after her to the elevator. We entered the wide walkway leading in through the town, toward the base. I'd rather have been walking with Raj, but they'd called him in last night to ask him something about his test, and so far I hadn't got a word of what that meant. Hopefully he wasn't in trouble. The girl and I soon passed a fountain. A real fountain, like from the stories. We both stopped to gape, and I extricated my arm from the girl's grasp. Part of me wanted to be offended, but she seemed so genuine. That music the water makes, she said. Isn't it the most wonderful sound ever? The most wonderful sound ever is the lamentations of my enemies, screaming my name towards the heavens with ragged, dying voices. The girl looked at me, cocking her head. Well, bless your stars. Sorry, I said. It's a line from a story. I stuck my hand to her. Best to be on good terms with other cadets. I'm call sign Spin. Kimmelin, she said, shaking my hand. We're supposed to have call signs already? I'm an overachiever. What room are you reporting to? She fished in her pocket and pulled out a paper. C-14, Cadet Flight B. Same as me. Call sign, Kimmelin murmured. What should I pick? Killer? I suggested. Afterburn. No, that's probably too confusing. Flesh Ripper. Couldn't it be something a little less gruesome? You're going to be a warrior. You need a warrior's name. Not everything's about war. It kind of is. And flight school especially is. I frowned, noting the accent in her voice. Where are you from? Not Igneous, I guess. Born and raised in Bountiful Cavern. She leaned in. We call it that, but nothing really grows there. Bountiful, I said. It was a cavern somewhat close to Igneous, also part of the Defiant League. That's where the clans from the Antioch crew settled, right? The Antioch had been one of the gunships in the old fleet, before we'd been driven into hiding here on Detritus. Yep, my great-grandmother was assistant quartermaster. She eyed me. You said your call sign was Spin? Shouldn't you be something like Lamentation or Eats Enemy Eyeballs? I shrugged. Spin is what my dad used to call me. She smiled brightly at that. Scud, they'd let this girl in, but had denied me? What was the DDF trying to do? Put together a knitting club? We approached the base, a group of tall, stern buildings surrounded by a wall. Right outside it, the farms gave way to an actual orchard. I stopped in the walkway and found myself gaping again. I'd seen these trees from a distance, but up close they seemed enormous, almost 3 meters tall. Before this, the tallest plant I'd seen was a mushroom that reached up to my waist. They planted those just after the Battle of Alta, Kimmelin said. It must take brave people to volunteer for service up here, so exposed to the air and to Krell attacks. She looked up at the sky in awe, and I wondered if this was the first time she was seeing it. We stepped up to a checkpoint in the wall, and I thrust my pin toward the guard there, half expecting rough treatment, like I'd always gotten from a Luco when entering Igneous. However, the bored guard only marked our names off on a list and waved us in. Not much ceremony for my first official entrance into Alta. Well, soon I'd be so famous, the guard at the door would salute me on sight. Inside, we counted off the buildings, joining a handful of other cadets. From what I understood, around 25 of us had passed the test, and had been organized into 3 training flights. Only the best of the best would actually pass flight school and be assigned to full-time pilot duty. Kimmelin and I soon arrived at a wide, single-story structure near the launch pads. Flight school. I barely held myself back from running over to the glistening starfighters lined up for duty. I'd done enough gawking for one day. Inside the building we found wide hallways, most of which appeared to be lined with classrooms. Kimmelin squealed, then rushed over to talk to another cadet, someone she apparently knew. So I stopped by a window on the outer wall and looked out to the sky, waiting for her. I found myself feeling anxious. Not about the training, but about this place. It's too big, too open. The hallways were over 1 meter wider than those of most buildings in Igneous, and the base's buildings sprawled outward instead of being built on top of one another. The sky was just up there, always present, looming, even with a force field between me and it, of the same invisible type that starfighters employed. I felt exposed. I was going to have to sleep up here, live, eat, exist, all out in the open. While I liked the sky, that didn't mean I wanted it peeking in during every intimate moment. I'll simply have to deal with it, I told myself. The warrior cannot choose her bed. She must bless the stars if she can choose her battlefield. A quote from Junmi's The Conquest of Space. I loved Grand stories about Junmi almost as much as I did the old Viking stories, even if they didn't have quite as many decapitations. Kimmelin returned, and we found our classroom. I took a deep breath. Time to become a pilot. We pushed open the doors. Chapter 8. 10 mock cockpits dominated the center of the room, arranged in a circle facing inward. Each bulky device had a seat, a control console, and part of a fuselage built around it, though no canopy. Other than that, they looked as if they'd been ripped right out of starships. Instead of the nose cones of ships, however, each had a large box attached to the front, maybe a meter tall and half as wide. Kimlin and I were apparently the first of our flight to arrive, and I checked the wall clock. It was 6:15. For once in my life, I was not only early, I was first. Well, technically second, as Kimlin jumped past me to look over the mock cockpits. Oh, I guess we're first. Well, the saint always said, if you can't arrive early, at least arrive before you're late. I walked into the room, setting down my backpack and checking out the mock pits. I recognized the control panel layout. They were from Poco-class ships, a basic, if fast, DDF starfighter model. The door opened, and 2 more cadets entered. The shorter boy at the front had dark blue hair and appeared to be Jungian. The crew of the Young Guan, from the old fleet, had largely been from China or Korea on Earth. The blue-haired boy grinned as he looked over the room, putting his backpack beside mine. Wow, our classroom? The girl behind him sauntered in like she owned the place. She was a lean, athletic girl with blonde hair and a ponytail. She wore a DDF uniform jacket over her jumpsuit, loose, like she was out in the town. Those 2 were followed by a girl with a tattoo across her lower jaw. She'd be Vickian, from Vicky Cavern. I didn't know much about them, only that they were the descendants of the Marines from the old space fleet. The Vickians had their own culture and kept to themselves, though they had reputations as great warriors. I smiled at her, but she looked away immediately, and didn't respond when Kimlin perkily introduced herself. Fine then, I thought. Kimlin got names and home caverns out of the other 2. The guy with the blue hair was Bim, and was indeed Jungian. His clan had been part of the hydroponics team on the old ship, and had settled in a nearby cavern that maintained a large set of underground farms, lit and maintained by ancient machinery. I'd never eaten any of the food from there. It was reserved for those who had many achievement merits or industry merits. The athletic girl was Hudia, from Igneous. I didn't know her, but the cavern was a big place with a vast population. As the time for class drew near, a tall girl entered and introduced herself as Freya. It was a good mythological name from Old Norse, of which I approved. She kind of had the look, too. Though she was skinny, she was tall, maybe even 185 centimeters, and she had blonde hair, which she wore cut very short. Her boots were brand new, polished to a shine and done up with gold clasps. Well, that made 6 of us. We'd have a few more, at least. About 10 minutes before the start of class, 3 young men walked in together. They were obviously friends, as they were talking and joking softly. I didn't recognize 2 of them, but the one at the front with brown skin and short curly hair was distinctive in a kind of baby-faced pretty boy way. The guy from the test, I realized. The son of a first citizen who had gotten free admission. Great. We were saddled with a useless aristocrat, someone who lived in the lowest and safest of the Defiant Caverns. He'd been in flight school not because of any skill or aptitude, but because he wanted to sport a cadet's pin and feel important. Judging by the way the other 2 talked, I instantly pegged them as his cronies. I'd have bet anything that all of them had gotten in without taking the test. So our cadet group had 3 people who didn't deserve to be here. The tall, baby-faced guy walked to the center of the ring of seats. How could a boy have a face that was so extremely punchable? He cleared his throat, then clasped his hand sharply. Get to attention, cadets. Is this how we want to present ourselves to our instructor? Lounging about, making idle chit-chat? Line up! Kimmelin, bless her stars, jumped up and stood at a kind of sloppy attention. His 2 cronies stepped over and fell into step as well, doing a much better impression of real soldiers. Everyone else just kind of looked at him. What gives you the right to order us around? Asked Hudia, the athletic girl from my own cavern. She stood leaning against the wall, arms folded. I want to make a good first impression on the instructor, cadet, Jerkface said. Think how inspiring it'll be when he comes in to find us all waiting at attention. Hudia snorted. Inspiring? We'll look like a bunch of suck-ups. Jerkface ignored her, instead inspecting his line of 3 cadets. He shook his head at Kimberlin, whose version of attention involved standing on the tips of her toes and saluting with both hands. It was ridiculous. You look ridiculous, Jerkface said to her. The girl's face fell, and she slumped. I felt an immediate burst of protective anger. I mean, he was right. They didn't have to belt it out like that. Who taught you to stand at attention? Jerkface asked. You're going to embarrass us. I can't have that. Yeah, I said. She'd be stealing your spot, since embarrassing us is clearly your job, Jerkface. He looked me up and down, taking obvious note of the patched state of my pilot's jumpsuit. It had been one of my father's, and had required serious modification to fit me. Do I know you, cadet? He asked. You look familiar. I was sitting in the front row taking the test, I said, when you turned in your exam without a single question answered. Maybe you saw me there when you glanced at the rest of the room to see what people look like when they actually have to work to get things. He drew his lips into a line. It seemed I'd touched a nerve. Excellent. First blood. I chose not to waste resources, he said, making someone grade my test when I'd already been offered a slot. One you didn't earn. He glanced at the other cadets in the room, who were watching with interest. Then he lowered his voice. Look, you don't need to make trouble. Just fall into line and fall into line, I said. You're still trying to give us orders? It's obvious I'm going to be your flight leader. You might as well get used to doing what I say. Arrogant son of a supernova. Just because you cheated your way into... I didn't cheat. Just because you bought your way into a flight school doesn't mean you'll be flight leader. You need to watch yourself. Don't make an enemy out of me. And if I do? Scud. It was annoying to have to look up at him. I leaped onto my seat to gain a height advantage for the argument, an action that seemed to surprise him. He cocked his head. What? Always attack from a position of superior advantage, I said. When this is done, Jerkface, I will hold your tarnished and melted pinup as my trophy, as your smoldering ship marks your pyre, and the final resting place of your crushed and broken corpse. The room grew quiet. All right, Jerkface said. Well, that was descriptive. Bless your stars, Kimberlin added. Hadia gave me a thumbs up and a grin, though the others in the room plainly had no idea what to make of me. And maybe my reaction had been over the top. I was used to making a scene. Life had taught me that aggressive threats would cause people to back off. But did I need to do that here? I realized something odd in that moment. None of these people seemed to know who I was. They hadn't grown up near my neighborhood. They hadn't gone to class with me. They might have heard of my father, but they didn't know me from another cadet. Here, I wasn't the rat girl or the daughter of a coward. Here I was free. The door chose that moment to open, and our instructor, Mongrel, stood in the doorway, holding a steaming mug of coffee in one hand, a clipboard in the other. In the light, I recognized him from the pictures of the first citizens, though his hair was grayer, and that mustache made him appear much older. We must have looked like quite the menagerie. I was still standing on the seat of my mock pit, looming over Jerkface. Several of the others had been snickering at our exchange, while Kimberlin was again trying to execute a salute. Mongrel glanced at the clock, which had just hit 700 hours. I hope I'm not interrupting anything intimate. I said. I jumped off my seat and tried a little laugh. That wasn't a joke, Mongrel barked. I don't joke. Line up by the far wall, all of you. We scrambled to obey. As we lined up, Jerkface pulled off a precise salute, and he held it, at perfect attention. Mongrel glanced at him and said, Don't be a suck-up, son. This isn't basic training, and you aren't grunts from the ground corps. Jerkface's expression fell, and he lowered his arm, then snapped to attention anyway. Sorry, sir. Mongrel rolled his eyes. My name is Captain Cobb. My call sign is Mongrel. But you will call me Cobb, or sir if you must. He trailed along the line, his limp prominent, taking a sip of his coffee. The rules of this class are simple. I teach, you learn. Anything that interferes with that is likely to get one of you killed. He paused near where I stood by Jerkface. That includes flirting. I felt my face go cold. Sir, I wasn't... It also includes talking back to me. You're in flight school now, stars help you. 4 months of training. If you make it to the end without being kicked out or shot down, then you pass. That's it. There are no tests. There are no grades. Just you in a cockpit. Convince me you deserve to remain there. I am the only authority that matters to you now." He waited, watching to see how he responded. And wisely, none of us said anything. "Most of you won't make it," he continued. "4 months may not seem like long, but it will feel like an eternity. Some of you will drop out under the stress, and the Krell will kill some others. Usually a flight of 10 ends up with one cadet graduating to full pilot. Maybe two." He stopped at the end of the line where Kimlin stood biting her lip. "This bunch, though," Cobb added, "I'd be surprised if any of you make it." He limped away from us, setting his coffee on a small desk at the front of the room, then riffling through the papers in his clipboard. "Which one of you is Jorgen Waite?" "Me, sir," Jerkface said, standing up straighter. "Great. You're flight leader." I gasped. Cobb eyed me but said nothing. "Jorgen, you'll need 2 assistant flight leaders. I want the names by the end of the day." "I can give those to you now, sir," he said, pointing to his 2 cronies, a shorter boy and a taller one. "Arturo and Ned." Cobb marked something on his clipboard. "Great. Everyone pick a seat. We're going to—" "Wait," I said. "That's it? That's how you choose our flight leader? You're not even going to see how we do first?" "Pick a seat, cadets," Cobb repeated, ignoring me. "But," I said. "Except Cadet Spencer," he said. "You will instead meet me in the hallway." I bit my tongue and stomped out into the hallway. I probably should have contained my frustration, but really? He immediately picked Jerkface? Just like that? Cobb followed me, then calmly shut the door. I prepared an outburst, but he spun on me and hissed, "Are you trying to ruin this, Spencer?" I choked off my retort, shocked by his sudden anger. "Do you know how far I had to stick my neck out to get you into this class?" he continued. "I argued that you sat in that room for hours, that you finished a damn near perfect test. It still took every bit of clout and reputation I've earned over the years to pull this off. Now the first chance you get, you're throwing a tantrum?" "But you didn't see what that guy was doing before class. He was strutting around, claiming he'd be flight leader. Turns out he had good reason." But what?" Cobb demanded. I stifled the words I was going to say, and instead remained silent. He took a deep breath. "Good. You can control yourself at least a little." He rubbed his brow with his thumb and forefinger. "You're just like your father. I spent half the time wanting to strangle the man. Unfortunately, you're not him. You have to live with what he did. You have to control yourself, Spencer. If it looks like I'm favoring you, someone will call improper bias, and you'll be pulled from my class faster than you can spit." "So you can't favor me?" I asked. "But everyone can favor the son of an aristocrat who didn't even have to finish his test?" Cobb sighed. "Sorry," I said. "No, I walked into that one," he said. "Do you know who that boy is?" "Son of a first citizen?" "Son of the Jeshua Waite, hero of the Battle of Alta. She flew 7 years in the DDF and has over 100 confirmed kills. Her husband is Algernon Waite, National Assembly leader and high foreman of our largest intercavern shipping company. They're among the most heavily merited people in the lower caverns." "So their son and his cronies get to be our leaders, just because of what their parents did?" "Jorgen's family owns 3 private fighters, and he has been training on them since he was 14. He has nearly 1,000 hours in the cockpit. How many do you have?" I blushed. "His cronies," Cobb said, "are Ned Strong, who has 2 brothers in the DDF right now, and Arturo Mendez, son of a cargo pilot, who had 16 years in the DDF. Arturo has been acting as co-pilot with his father and is certified with 200 hours flight time. Again, how many hours do you have?" I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry for questioning you, sir. Is this the part where I do push-ups or clean a bathroom with a toothbrush or something?" "I already said this isn't infantry training. The punishment here isn't some menial stupidity." Cobb pulled open the door to the room. "Push me too far, and the punishment will be simple. You won't get to fly." Alrighty, and that brings us to the end of this reading. Enjoy your day.